Hello guys, welcome back to our anime moment. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Martial Universe Season 7 Part 1 based on novel. So let's start. In 2 days, they would know who was stronger, the Super Empire, or the Dark Horse, Lin Dong. Such an arrogant fellow. It seems that a fierce battle is unavoidable. Little Martin chuckled as he spiritedly watched the receding auction crowd. Let's go, time to make some preparations when we're back. Since the challenge has been issued, we shall naturally receive it. Lin Dong smiled. His face did not show any signs of fear at all. Even though Fong Kang had obtained the Heavenly Soul Treasure today and his fighting capabilities would be greatly increased, it was still too early to make a conclusion on who would emerge as the victor. After saying these words, Lin Dong turned around and cupped his hands towards Song Tai. Even though Fong Kang had wanted to settle the matter on the spot and Lin Dong did not mind, he would be more than happy to accept another 2 days of preparation. Therefore, he appreciated Song Tai's favor. With regards to Lin Dong's respectful gesture, Song Tai merely waved his hand. Soon after, he turned around as a voice that was audible to only Lin Dong silently rang across the place. Lin Dong, this is all I can do. The battle 2 days later will depend on your capabilities. At least, Fong Kang and his counterparts will not dare to do anything to you within these 2 days. You can make your preparations peacefully. Upon hearing this voice, Lin Dong grinned and lightly nodded. Without saying anything else, he left the auction market with Little Flame and the rest. Mu Lin watched the figures that had captivated everyone's attention leave and could not help but lament as he softly remarked, I had initially believed that our Lone Moon Empire and the Wind Cloud Empire would fight over this auction. I never expect us to become spectators in the end. Lin Dong truly knows how to seize the limelight. I'm afraid they will be in troubles 2 days later. Mu Hanyu slightly furrowed her umber-black eyebrows and said. She knew that Lin Dong and his counterparts were quite capable, that the Wind Cloud Empires were exceptionally ferocious and tough. Furthermore, they had obtained a Heavenly Soul Treasure today. Even the Lone Moon Empire did not dare to provoke them, yet Lin Dong and his counterparts. It's indeed troublesome. With regards to this fact, even Mu Lin, who usually had high expectation of Lin Dong, nodded his head solemnly. He then sighed, right now, we can only wait and see. Sigh, the Wind Cloud Empire is so powerful, I don't even know if Lin Dong and his party can pass this ordeal. After saying this, Mu Lin clearly did not wish to speak anymore. With a wave of his hand, he left the auction with his men. Even though Wanxiang City was extremely huge, the news of what happened in the auction spread throughout the city within half an hour. Immediately, the atmosphere of the entire city began to boil. Who were the Wind Cloud Empire? They were the super empire that dominated Wanxiang City. Although the fighting amongst the 4 great super empires never ceased in Wanxiang City, everyone knew that the Wind Cloud Empire were the most powerful. The Wind Cloud Empire might have an impressive reputation, but at the same time, Lin Dong, who had barged into the scene, was also no nameless individual. Though he was from a low-rank empire, he was still able to defeat numerous high-rank empires. In fact, he had even single-handedly defeated the combined forces of the Northwest region's 3 overlords. Next, he had also dominated 2 of the 4 mysterious sects' inheritance and even suppressed the 2 elite practitioners of the Great Gan Empire. 3 of the 4 top ranks on the Nirvana Monument in the Wanxiang City were monopolized by Lin Dong and his friends. In 1 day, Lin Dong had legitimately obtained the first rank of the Earth category by defeating Luo Tong, the 4 Yuan Nirvana stage former #1 ranker in the Earth category. These numerous achievements of his were enough to make anyone forget about his low-rank empire identity. Thus, when everyone knew of the battle between Lin Dong and Fong Kang, they did not think that Lin Dong and his counterparts were overestimating their capabilities. Instead, the people were in anticipation, the kind of anticipation that normally arose due to an evenly matched situation. It was evident that in many people's eyes, the low-rank empire Lin Dong already possessed a reputation on equal footing with these super empires. Naturally, this reputation would have to be justified by the result of the intense battle in 2 days. If Lin Dong claimed victory, his name would cause boom throughout the ancient battlefield. If he lost, his miraculous reputation would come to an end. Moreover, this battle would be the first battle in the Hundred Empire War that was between a super empire and a rising dark horse. Its result was definitely highly anticipated. Under the people's anticipation, 2 days passed in a blink of an eye. The morning sunlight contained a trace of coolness as it scattered down from all over the sky, wrapping the entire Wanxiang city within it. The fiery heat within the Wanxiang city had already reached at extreme level after having been brewed for 2 days. Everyone's eyes were wildly hot with anticipation. They had left their various empires and arrived at this ancient battlefield, where the competition was extremely intense. All of them trained bitterly in this place for a year just in order to be able to obtain a good result in the Hundred Empire War. This was in hopes of finally catching the eye of a super sect and allow the value of one's empire to soar. That big battle which they had all waited for 1 year had finally begun. The various talents or monsters that had come from countless number of empires were finally going to fight in this place and determine the winner. The true leaders of the younger generation within these Eastern Xian region empire would also appear in this place. While the entire city was heated up, a couple of figures were slowly walking out from a small yard in the southeastern corner of the city. It was Lin Dong's group. Lin Dong raised his head and watched the hot sun in the sky. A smile surfaced on his face. He had also waited 1 year for this day. Little Flame was carrying a black-colored metal rod behind Lin Dong. The shadow that was created from his muscular body had covered most of Lin Dong's body. At a glance, he gave one a kind of intense and powerful pressure. Standing beside, Little Martin still had a lazy attitude, appearing completely different from the intense pressure that Little Flame emitted. His handsome face appeared a little demon-like under the shine of the sunlight. However, Sukue and the rest were aware that this person, whom they had witnessed fighting once before, was the most unfathomable one amongst the 3 of them. Sukue gave an inexplicable emotional sigh within his heart when he saw Lin Dong's group. From the first impression one got by looking at them, Lin Dong was inferior to Little Flame in his size and strength and was inferior to Little Martin in terms of appearance. Moreover, his strength might not even be the strongest amongst the 3. Yet, the one who truly made the decision amongst them was him. After having lived together for a period of time, Sukue was also aware of some of the matters regarding Lin Dong within this ancient battlefield. From the occasional conversation, he was aware that Little Flame and Little Martin were not as outstanding as they were current at the beginning. At that time, all the battles in the outside world were personally won by Lin Dong, who appeared to be the most ordinary amongst the 3. Sukue looked at Lin Dong, who had raised his head and looked at the sun. The latter suddenly opened his arms and the sunlight shone onto his body, emitting a kind of uncontrolled heat. His glow was actually even more dazzling than Little Martin or Little Flame by his side at this moment. He would become the most dazzling person in this ancient battlefield. This unknown thought suddenly flashed across Sukue's heart. Immediately, he turned his head, only to see that Tsuruo by his side was using her beautiful large eyes to stare at the figure in front. Her pretty face contained a faint bright redness. That figure, who had spreaded his arms under the sunlight, gave her the feeling of him being able to hold the sky even if it crumbled. That kind of feeling actually looked even more solid than the back of her big brother, who had been protecting her in the past. Cough. Sukue coughed softly, waking the young lady beside him. The latter immediately lowered her head from the shock. The tip of her delicate ears had become red. Sukue helplessly shook his head. After Little Martin had lent a hand, Tsuruo had finally begun to barely control a little of the enormous energy within her body during these 2 days. Although there was a limit, the strength that erupted suddenly would also be quite frightening. However, Tsuruo's character did not experience much change despite the increase in her strength. Her gentle and weak manner caused Sukue to be a little worried about her ability to endure the harshness of the Hundred Empire War. Let's go. Sukue's soft cough had also caused Lin Dong to recover. Immediately, the corner of his mouth was slowly lifted into a bright smile. He waved his hand and walked out of the door. The others immediately followed closely behind him. The eastern gate of the Wanxiang city was already completely filled with people. Black masses of human heads spread out from within the city like a black-colored wave. The black wave permeated everywhere. There was a tall slope outside of the city. An incomparably large light curtain had spread apart in a circular shape at the tall slope, extending all the way to the horizon. When one's eyes looked past the light curtain, it was possible to see the wild forest that was within it. There was a kind of vague tragic aura that spread from within it. Every 100 Empire war would erupt at this place. Many dark horses had appeared here and gained glory in this place. However, there were also many geniuses who had fallen in this place and became a stepping stone for others in their path to glory. Various empires occupied different positions on the city wall. The ones at the front were naturally the most dazzling for super empires. The scene was swept over the entire area before finally gathering onto the area in front of the Wind Cloud Empire. Fong Kang was standing with his hands behind him at that spot. His mind no longer had the kind of fury from 2 days ago. Instead, he appeared unusually dark and sinister. Of course, the only thing that did not change was the densely cold killing intent within his eyes. Quite a number of people faced each other. They vaguely sensed the blood within their bodies was showing signs of boiling. Subsequently, all of them would enter that core area where the final competition would begin. At the same time, they would also witness a sensational fight. Swoosh! A sound of wind being split suddenly appeared in the midair while the hot blood in the bodies of countless number of people were boiling. After which, a number of people landed onto the city wall amidst exclamations that appeared one after another. It's Lin Dong's group. Countless number of gazes swept towards this group while the exclamation sounded. Finally, they were focused on the figure that had suddenly appeared. The already sinister expression of Fong Kang, who was at the front of the city wall, became even darker and deeper. He slowly turned his head and his pair of dark chilly blade-like eyes shot towards Lin Dong. Lin Dong raised his head, showing no signs of shrinking back as he faced Fong Kang. The dark and chilly killing intent that seeped out from their crossing eyes appeared to cause even the air above the wall to solidify slightly. Fong Kang parted the corner of his mouth, revealing his dense white teeth. He extended his thumb towards Lin Dong before pointing it down. His eyes appeared ferocious. The surroundings were in a clamor. This Fong Kang seemed to have made up his mind to kill Lin Dong's group this time around. A fierceness permeated around Little Flame as he looked at the provoking attitude of Fong Kang. His hand held the metal rod on his shoulder and had an impulse to charge forward. However, he was finally stopped by Lin Dong with a wave of the latter's hand. Everyone. A faint powerful voice was suddenly transmitted from the midair after Lin Dong stopped Little Flame. Everyone raised their heads and saw Song Tai, who was suspended in the midair. Next, anyone who possessed the Nirvana seal will have the qualification to enter this area. However, I will remind everyone here that one is allowed to enter this place but not allowed to leave. As long as one enters it, one would end up facing the most merciless competition. There is no pity inside, only victors. Song Tai's eyes that had suddenly become stern caused the expressions of quite a number of people to change. Their faces became volatile. I think all of you should be aware that the super sects will only select the most outstanding people. The only way for all of you to prove how outstanding you are is by defeating your opponents and snatch their Nirvana seals. Once you have absorbed a sufficient amount of Nirvana seals, the Nirvana seal in your palm will gradually turn into a purple-gold color. At the time you completely possess the purple-gold Nirvana seal, you will possess the qualification to advance into the Nirvana gold ranking and catch the eye of those super sects. Lin Dong focused his eyes. It was unexpected that this 100 Empire war was so harsh. One must snatch the Nirvana seal from the hands of others if one wished to advance into the Nirvana gold ranking. This was similar to breeding a poison bug. One would place hundreds of them into a container. The final survival was the most outstanding amongst them all. The 100 Empire War only recognizes victory. It does not recognize defeat. If you are mentally prepared, then, begin. Now is the time to prove your 1 year of training. Song Tai pointed towards the light curtain at the front that seemed to extend towards the sky. His low and deep voice sounded beside everyone's ears. Countless number of people raised their heads. Their eyes stared at the light curtain as traces of wild heat slowly climbed into them. How could they shrink back at this moment? Let's go. A low and deep roars were emitted from some unknown spot. Immediately, the heavens and earth shook. A frightening tide surged out like a locust swarm. Finally, they rushed through the sky and charged into the enormous light barrier like moths pouncing into a flame. "Lin Dong, follow me in and today will be the day you die." Fong Kang roared towards the sky from the city wall. His eyes were scarlet as he stared at Lin Dong in a dense manner. After which, his body rushed forward, leading the large group of people from the Wind Cloud Empire as well as a monstrous killing intent as he arrogantly charged into the light barrier. Lin Dong raised his head. He looked at the backs of Fong Kang. With a gentle lick of his lips, he smilingly asked, "Everyone, you ready?" "Yes." Everyone behind parted their mouths and smiled. Fighting intent proudly stood in their eyes. There was not the least fear within them. Subsequently, they would face the strongest super empire within the Wanxiang city. "Let's go." Lin Dong laughed out loud. His laughter was like a thunder as he cupped his hands towards Song Tai in the mid-air. "Master Song, thank you for your help. However, leave everything else to us." Lin Dong's body rushed out after his laughter sounded. He brought about waves of rushing wind sound as he charged towards the light barrier. Little Flame and the others followed closely behind with a monstrous fighting intent. Song Tai watched Lin Dong's group from the sky as they charged into the light barrier with a monstrous fighting intent. An admiration flashed across his eyes. He knew that if Lin Dong's group could pass this trial, their reputation would likely shake the entire core region. Whether they were dragons or mere worms would be determined by this battle. The moment that they charged into the light barrier, everyone could sense an indescribable tragic aura pouncing towards them. Immediately, it caused the yuan power within the bodies of quite a number of people to churn intensely. All of them hurriedly stopped their bodies. Upon stopping, those many gazes immediately turned towards this core region. After which, their expression became slightly dull. The interior and the outside was only separated by a light barrier. However, they appeared to be two completely different times. The sunlight outside was warm, but this place contained a thread of chillness. The entire sky was not blue. Instead, it was a kind of dark red color. One's eyes would reflect the red glow when one raised one's head and took a look. The place appeared exceptionally strange. There was a vast and seemingly endless primitive forest under the dark red sky. Enormous trees that were 1,000 feet tall stood beside each other, causing one to be unable to see its edge. It was as though the entire place was borderless. There were also the occasional soul-stirring roar from a beast being emitted from the forest. Those roars contained an endless amount of fierceness. This was a dangerous place. The vast and mighty people that had entered this region from the Wanxiang city directly broke the original silence of this place. The sky was densely packed with human figures suspended in it. Their gazes were filled with surprise and fiery heat as they looked at this place. This would be their final competition arena. They were aware that there would definitely be many experts surging into this vast place from many other regions. Soon after, they would meet at a certain spot within this core area. Finally, they would end up fighting in order to absorb the Nirvana seal in the other party's hands. The victor and the loser would be determined by the result of this 1 year of training. Of course, before that, they would first observe a soul-stirring face-off that was sufficient to boil their blood. Nor. A group of figures with overflowing killing intent rushed out in front of the countless number of gazes before finally landing on a desolated forest a short distance away. Dark and cold evil ghost-like eyes stared intently at the entrance of the light barrier behind them. "Lin Dong, come out!" Fong Kang's low and deep roar was permeated with the desire to kill. "Are you so anxious to give your heavenly soul treasure to others?" A laughter was transmitted from within the light curtain. Lin Dong's group also broke through the light barrier before appearing in this core region. A wild and violent smile slowly appeared on Fong Kang's face as he watched Lin Dong's group stepping into this place. He knew that Lin Dong would no longer have any retreat path in this place. He could do as he liked and torture this fellow, who had infuriated him to the point of being better off dead. Lin Dong's group also gradually descended from the sky while being watched by many people. They landed on a large tree not far in front of Fong Kang's group. A smile was contained on their faces and there was no sign of any fear. The Lone Moon Empire, Forest Empire, and Lahore Empire, the three other super empires from the Wanxiang city, also revealed themselves at a short distance away. However, they also did not leave this place immediately. Instead, their eyes were watching the face-off in front of them in a searing hot manner. This kind of collision was something that even they could not easily ignore. Although I do not know where you get the confidence to enter this core region from, your courage has surprised me. I will get someone to deliver your corpse back to your empire after the 100 Empire War is over. Fong Kang parted his mouth towards Lin Dong in a dense manner and said. Lin Dong ignored this irritating fellow. His eyes swept over the experts from the Wind Cloud Empire and softly uttered, "Leave Fong Kang to me. I will deal with that Meng Lai." Little Flame waved the metal rod in his hand, bringing about a rumbling tearing wind sound as he spoke in a vast and mighty voice. "You leave the weakest one to me? Don't tell me that the both of you already think that your ability have already exceeded mine." Little Martin narrowed his eyes and asked playfully. "This is the core region. There will definitely be experts from the super sects observing this place. We must be careful. It is best for you to avoid fighting as much as possible." Lin Dong smiled and said. "Moreover, you must also take care of Little Ruo and the rest when you deal with Luo Tong. The Wind Cloud Empire has recruited quite a number of experts while we are ultimately short in numbers." Little Martin curled his mouth and said, "Relax. This girl is currently not as weak as you think. The strength that she unleashed for a short period of time is something that even you will find troublesome to deal with. How can I be compared with Big Brother Lin Dong?" Su Ru by the side softly said with a red face. "Little Ruo, the matter of protecting your brother and the rest will be your duty. We will not be able to divert our attention when the time comes." Lin Dong smilingly uttered. Su Ruo clenched her small hand tightly. She nodded in a somewhat determined manner. This time around, she would definitely not allow herself to be a burden to Lin Dong's group. Lin Dong finally slowly stepped forward in front of the numerous eyes after seeing this. Mighty Yuan power slowly whizzed out from within his body like a tide when he stepped forward. 3 Yuan Nirvana stage? Is this your ability? Challenging across the stages? You think that I am those trash whom you have met in the past? Fong Kang involuntarily laughed out loud towards the sky after seeing the Yuan power that surged out from within Lin Dong's body. His laughter was filled with ridicule. "I am already at the peak of the 4 Yuan Nirvana stage. If you only have this little ability, you will have really disappointed me." Fong Kang strided forward. The surging Yuan power of someone from the peak of the 4 Yuan Nirvana stage erupted from him. It swept over the sky, forming a pressure that covered Lin Dong from all directions. Under the mighty strength of Fong Kang's surging Yuan power, Lin Dong's aura was clearly at a disadvantage. Regardless of how one put it, Fong Kang was definitely stronger when it came to a competition between the strength of Yuan power alone. If this is what you really think, you will also have disappointed me. However, Lin Dong merely smiled in the face of the vast and mighty pressure from Fong Kang. A thought passed through his mind. The Yuan power, mental energy, and devouring power surged out at the same time. Finally, they were completely poured into the ancient universe formation above his dantian. Boom boom. A low explosive sound flowed within Lin Dong's veins. Finally, it spread to all of his limbs. His body remained quiet for an instant before a wave of strange grayish-black energy suddenly began to erupt from within his body. The grayish-black colored energy was not very strong and it could not be compared with Fong Kang's aura that spread through the sky. However, the moment this energy appeared, the Yuan power pressure that was originally suppressing Lin Dong completely collapsed. The pressure that originated from Fong Kang totally vanished within a few hundred feet around Lin Dong. What a strange energy! This sudden change had caused everyone to be startled. They did not understand why Lin Dong's original pure Yuan power would suddenly be transformed into such an unusual energy. However, this kind of energy clearly rode above the pure Yuan power. Otherwise, it would be impossible for it to cause Fong Kang's 4 Yuan Nirvana stage's mighty Yuan power to collapse until such an extent. This Lin Dong does indeed have something to support him. The eyes of Mu Lin and the others also contained a dense shock as they watched this scene. Clearly, they were all surprised by this move from Lin Dong. It will be more interesting this way. Otherwise, the whole thing will be too boring. A surprise flashed over Fong Kang's face. Immediately, he gave a dense smile. Both of his eyes instantly became stern and cold in the next moment. He extended his long finger and cut it through the air. Slash slash. A fierce wind was suddenly formed after the finger slashed downwards. 200 over feet large yuan power wind blades directly formed over his fingers. After which, they tore through the air and rushed towards Lin Dong with lightning-like speed. Swoosh! Lin Dong's body shook. He directly transformed into an afterimage that rushed out. The grayish-black merged force agglomerated over the surface of his body like a grayish-black meteorite. It shot out in a straight line and collided head-on with the two sharp yuan power blades. Bang! A low explosion was emitted from the sky. 2 yuan power wind blades were blasted apart. The grayish-black light rushed out and appeared in front of Fong Kang. Fist shadows whizzed out, appearing just like a storm. It contained a shocking fierceness as it covered Fong Kang's body. Humph! Fong Kang merely let out a cold snort in the face of this fiercely violent attack from Lin Dong. The seal formed by his hands changed, mighty yuan power transformed into numerous rotating tornado that completely blocked Lin Dong's storm-like fist shadows. Boom boom boom. The punches exploded onto the yuan power swirling wind. Each contact unleashed an ear-piercing sound. At the end, it basically formed a continuous noise that spread over the sky in a deafening manner. Following the release of that sonic wave, there was a fierce ripple that erupted due to the intense collision. It had only been a short 10 seconds. However, the two of them had already made dozens of exchanges with an extremely fierce stance. That collision was greatly shocking to one's eyes. The entire area was completely silent as they watched this scene. The expressions of quite a number of people changed a little. Just the remnant ripple that spread apart was sufficient to frighten some 3 yuan Nirvana stage experts. They really had difficulty imagining how Lin Dong was able to rely on his 3 yuan Nirvana stage strength to fight head-on in such a manner with Fong Kang, who had reached the peak of the 4 yuan Nirvana stage. The two of them had yet to unleash any powerful martial arts until this point, and they were challenging each other to see how strong their foundation was. This lad did indeed possess an ability that an ordinary person was unaware of in order to have the courage to directly face the anger of a super empire. Bang! Another extremely fierce collision occurred. Frightening yuan power swept apart. Lin Dong's and Fong Kang's bodies were shaken until they took over 10 steps back. Their breathing were a little heavier compared to before. However, the fierceness in their eyes was becoming increasingly intense. Meng Lai, lead the others and finish all of them off. Leave Lin Dong for me to deal with. Fong Kang's face was ferocious as he cried out in a sinister manner. Understood. A cruel smile surfaced on Meng Lai's face when he heard this. He nodded. An evilness was revealed in his eyes as they turned towards Little Flame's group a short distance away. Boom! Little Flame stepped forward. The metal rod in his hand tore through the air. A monstrous aura spread apart. At this moment, he appeared just like a fierce beast once again awakening from his slumber. Second brother, I am going to attack. Blood surged within Little Flame's eyes. He let out a buzz as his strong body rushed towards Meng Lai while being accompanied by an enormous shadow. The face-off between both parties had completely erupted at this moment. Little Flame's muscular figure surged forward with an astonishing repressive force. Even Meng Lai's murderous aura was repressed when that kind of overflowing fiendish aura erupted from Little Flame's body. Before Little Flame got close to his target, the black-colored metal pole in his hand already whizzed forward. With a force that was as heavy as a mountain, the pole ripped through the air and blasted ruthlessly towards Meng Lai's vital points. Hey, you're courting your own death, bastard! When Meng Lai saw the incoming Little Flame, his eyes froze due to the overwhelming fiendish aura that was around Little Flame's body. However, a smirk still came out of his mouth. With a grasp of his palms, a mud-colored giant hammer appeared in his hands. He then swung it with both his arms and slammed it down ferociously. Clang! As the metal pole collided against the giant hammer, an ear-piercing sound echoed throughout the air. Ripples of visible energy waves diffused from the collision point with a terrifying speed. Bang! Grumble! The enormous tall tree beneath both of them was being sliced across through its middle and broke in an instant. As the tall tree broke and fell, dust pervaded the sky. That kind of might being displayed was rather horrifying. Swish! As dust filled the sky, the two figures that were overwhelmed with fiendish auras barely came to a standstill before they started to surge forward again without even waiting for the onlookers to return to their senses. The metal pole and the giant hammer collided frantically against each other in the mid-air. Violent waves of wind ripples swept across the area continuously. From afar, Mu Lin and his counterparts were looking at the battle between Little Flame and Meng Lai, while their facial expressions turned increasingly solemn. This big fellow's capabilities are very powerful. He hid his true strength before the Nirvana monument. Mu Lin slowly said. Mu Hanyu nodded her petite head lightly. There was a strong trace of astonishment in her beautiful eyes. She clearly knew about Meng Lai's capabilities. However, even though the battle before her eyes was exceptionally frantic, that muscular figure did not show any sign of falling into a disadvantageous position. Furthermore, the kind of fiendish aura that he exuded was much stronger than Meng Lai's, who had numerous lives and blood on his hands. I'm afraid the Lin Dong trio is not as simple as they seem, Mu Lin said in a deep voice. Following which, he shifted his face to the other side where Luo Tong led a group of Wind Cloud Empire's practitioners and surrounded Little Martin, who had yet to take any actions, and his counterparts. Even after being confronted with such situation, the handsome Little Martin's face remained nonchalant without any sign of worrying. Girl, I shall leave the rest of the practitioners to you. Remember, don't let Lin Dong and Little Flame get distracted, Little Martin said indifferently and looked at Luo Tong after stretching his back. Okay. Su Ru bit her red lips and nodded her head repeatedly. I'm afraid it's not up to you to decide whether they will get distracted or not. Luo Tong sneered. There were 5 3-yuan Nirvana stage practitioners behind him. With the addition of himself, it would not be much of a problem for this lineup to handle Little Martin and his counterparts. However, just when Luo Tong finished sneering, he saw the corners of Little Martin's mouth curled up into a smirk. Immediately, a shiver went down his spine. Before he could say anything, Little Martin's figure oddly disappeared. The fact that Luo Tong was able to step into the 4-yuan Nirvana stage proved that he was rather capable. Therefore, when Little Martin's figure disappeared, resplendent golden light and vigorous yuan power gushed out Little Martin's body. Swoosh! Just when the golden light gushed out, a demon-like figure appeared before Luo Tong's eyes. Then, he saw Little Martin reached out his palm and a slap swept across the air. Clang! As the slap swept across the air, an exceptional violent gale formed and landed on Luo Tong's face with a lightning speed. Immediately, a metallic sound was given off and Luo Tong was sent flying by Little Martin's slap. Stabilizing his distressed figure, Luo Tong's face was still protected by his Nirvana golden body. However, his face still swelled up and appeared extremely comical. You? With a shocked and angry look on his face, Luo Tong stared at Little Martin, who was walking casually towards the former. Luo Tong's readiness had silently reached its highest level. The previous attack from Little Martin had made him realize that this devilish handsome fellow's powers were rather terrifying. At least when he fought with Lin Dong that night, the latter did not force him into such distressed state. Actually, this fellow is the scariest out of the 3 of them. This thought mysteriously came up into Luo Tong's mind. Soon after, his body broke into a cold sweat and he clenched his teeth and roared, "All of you, take action now and capture that girl." As long as he could capture Su Ru, Lin Dong and his counterparts would not act rashly to prevent any harm to Su Ru. When that moment came, the situation would turn in their favor. Even though it was dishonorable to use such method against a teenage girl, he could not care too much at this point of time. Still have the time to shout out commands her. Little Martin's facial expression was slightly cold. With a step forward, he oddly vanished again. Upon seeing this, Luo Tong's figure hurriedly retreated. However, after a few seconds, a figure appeared before him like a sticky parasite. A slap flew across the air and Luo Tong was sent flying off again. Do it. When those Wind Cloud Empire's practitioners saw the 4-yuan Nirvana stage practitioner being reduced to such sorry state, they could not help but feel stupefied. Without any hesitation and with a roar, they took actions together and reached out their hands toward Su Ru. Upon seeing this, Su Kuei's facial expression changed drastically. Beside him, Su Ru was biting her lips lightly. Then, she took a step forward and with a rarely seen determination, she spoke with a trembling voice, "Big brother, you are not their match. Let me handle this." Little Ru. Su Kuei was shocked. Before he could say anything, he saw Su Ruo reached out her slender jade-white finger and bit it lightly with her mouth. A trace of blood seeped out from the tip of her finger. She then pulled up her sleeves and revealed some weird symbols on her snow-white wrist. The blood from her fingertip dripped onto one of the symbols on her wrist and that particular symbol became diluted promptly. As that symbol became diluted, an enormous energy that alarmed Su Kuei gushed out like a python that woke up from its slumber while displaying a towering might. Weird dark green energy curled around Su Ru's body. Her jet-black long hair floated behind her back and was dyed green by that weird energy. As Su Ru raised her head, her elegant face was surging with chilliness. She slowly raised her slender jade-white hands and then clenched them abruptly. Bang! A violent, green-colored glowing energy wave suddenly swept across the area. The 5 3-yuan Nirvana stage practitioners were knocked flying backward and when they landed, they looked extremely pathetic. "I can't let all of you distract Brother Lin Dong," Su Ru warned in a cold and crisp voice while her body was surging with violent energy and her green glowing eyes were staring at the 5 Wind Cloud Empire's practitioners, whose facial expressions had changed drastically. They have completely broken out into a fight. The same thought came to everyone's minds as they looked at the battles that erupted simultaneously across the sky. At Lin Dong's side, the battle had gone all out on its offensive and exceeded everyone's expectations. This war was getting more and more interesting. At this moment, the sky had been divided into a few battlegrounds and the most eye-captivating one was between Lin Dong and Fong Kang. Anyone could tell that these two men were the cause of their respective camps. No matter which one of them lost, it would deal a huge blow to the morale of the loser's camp. Boom! The two demon-like figures fought viciously with a lightning speed in the sky. Waves of thunder-like sounds echoed throughout the sky, setting off fear and trepidation in countless people's heart. One mistake was all it took to lose the battle. Fong Kang's face was gloomy. During the previous exchange, he discovered that he could not thoroughly suppress Lin Dong with his 4-yuan Nirvana stage's mastery of yuan power. Is it because of that weird energy? Fong Kang stared at the grayish-black energy that was surrounding Lin Dong's body. His eye pupils dilated and he could sense that every time Lin Dong and him exchanged blows, a part of his attack's strength would disappear mysteriously. At the same time, Lin Dong's attacks would suddenly become much more stronger. That kind of feeling was as if the strength that he lost had been absorbed by Lin Dong. There's something odd with this fellow, I can't let this battle drag on. As this thought flashed across Fong Kang's mind, his facial expression grew gloomy. He took in a deep breath of air and the surging yuan power around his body boiled instantly. At this moment, his eyes became abnormally intense. Howl! Suddenly, violent gales began to form in the sky. Eventually, the gales materialized into columns of huge tornadoes and terrifying ripping forces swept across the sky ferociously. From this scene, anyone could tell that Fong Kang could not help but use his martial art to try and suppress Lin Dong. Lin Dong, no matter how capable are you, I shall take your pathetic little life. Fong Kang roared towards the sky. For huge tornadoes spun crazily around his body. From afar, it displayed a formidable might. This is. As Mu Lin and his counterparts saw this scene, their eye pupils dilated. Apparently, they recognized the powerful martial art that Fong Kang had displayed. Great demonic tornado palm. With a sinister-looking face, Fong Kang changed his hand seal and the 4 tornadoes surged forward abruptly. An exceptionally violent yuan power lingered within the tornadoes. As the tornadoes surged forward, numerous faintly discernible huge faces formed and seethed with a demonic aura. Boom boom. The 4 gigantic tornadoes ripped across the sky like a terrorizing dragon that was made of wind. Powerful gales directly ripped out 4 enormous trails in the savage jungle that was beneath the fight. Clearly, the martial art that Fong Kang had displayed was a rather powerful soul martial art. This display of might would make even the face of a 4-yuan nirvana stage practitioner like Mu Lin turn solemn. They knew that if they were the ones fighting Fong Kang, they might have to go all out in order to handle that attack. I may not be good at a lot of things, but I'm strong-willed and that's something nobody can take away from me. Lin Dong raised his head and looked at the 4 gigantic palm-like tornadoes. With a loud chuckle, his hand seal changed with a lightning speed. Following which, 5 black-colored beams of light shot out from his body in an instant. Congeal. As the light beams congealed, they materialized into 5 ancient and huge fingers in the twinkling of an eye. Then, under numerous attentive gazes, the fingers lined up in a straight line and became a big hand that was emitting ancient and savage aura. However, this time around, this big hand was different from the previous one. It was of a dark grayish color and there was an additional trace of mysteriousness to it. As the big hand formed, the dimension of nothingness exploded. A faintly discernible shadow appeared and an extremely powerful aura of might began to pervade the air. Soul martial art. Numerous gazes were directed at the shadow that came out of the dimension of nothingness and cries of surprise could be heard continuously. The onlookers could sense that the martial art Lin Dong had just displayed was an extremely powerful soul martial art. Great desolate imprisoning heavenly hand, break it! Lin Dong's facial expression was intense. As he abruptly clenched his fist, the shadow that came out of the dimension of nothingness waved its hand at this moment as well. Immediately, the dark grayish big hand whizzed across the air, creating violent vibrations through the airspace that it had whizzed past. Finally, under numerous attentive gazes, the hand landed ferociously onto the palm that was made up of 4 yuan power-filled tornadoes. Rumble. When the collision took place, it was as if the entire heaven and earth trembled. Waves of ear-splitting rumble resounded frantically throughout the area. Those practitioners who were near to the battleground were directly affected by the waves of rumble. Immediately, their faces turned pale white and they retreated quickly from the area. I want to see how many times you can withstand my attack. When the tornado's palm was blocked, Fong Kang's facial expression grew increasingly fierce. However, a tinge of solemnness began to develop behind that fierce facial expression. His strength was supposed to surpass Lin Dong's and he even displayed such powerful soul martial art, and yet he still failed to obtain an advantageous position steadily. No matter what, he did not dare to underestimate Lin Dong's strength anymore. Otherwise, he would be the one who failed miserably in this battle. Clearly, Fong Kang would not allow this to happen. As such, when he saw his tornado's palm was blocked, he took a step forward and waves of vigorous yuan power gushed out from his body. Changing his hand seal, he formed another 4 gigantic tornadoes that swept towards Lin Dong with a much fiercer poise. The more attacks you launch at me, the more I shall block them. Facing such wild and torrential attacks from Fong Kang, Lin Dong's eyes were burning with battle fury as well. As he flipped his hand, waves of fusion force gushed out from his body continuously. The waves of fusion force eventually materialized into a big hand that blasted towards the tornado's palm with an earth-shattering force. Boom boom boom. Horrifying and wild collisions continued to take place in the sky. Many onlookers' facial expression gradually turned grim when they saw the energy waves that swept across the sky. Usually, this kind of powerful soul martial art consumed an astonishing amount of yuan power. Currently, the battle between these 2 individuals had reached its climax. Whoever could not sustain and give up first, he would be devoured by his opponent's formidable attack immediately. From a different perspective, Fong Kang had a huge advantage in this kind of direct confrontation. After all, he was a 4-yuan nirvana stage practitioner, which was 1 level higher than Lin Dong. His mastery of yuan power was much more refined than Lin Dong's as well. If this battle of attrition continued, Lin Dong would fall into a disadvantageous position. Of course, that was usually the case. However, after Lin Dong displayed that kind of terrifying powers that far exceeded a 3-yuan Nirvana stage practitioner was capable of, no one would consider him under the usual case. As the battle between Lin Dong and Fong Kang reached its climax, on the other side, the battle between Little Flame and Meng Lai had been fierce and violent all the way since it started. The metal pole and giant hammer were being brandished in the air. Every movement possessed terrifying power that was enough to split open mountains and shatter the earth. It was an exceptionally horrifying sight to behold. Boom! Two muscular figures collided against each other ruthlessly before visible energy ripples swept out from the collision point. Beneath them, the savaged huge jungle blew up into nothing but dust and became a huge piece of flat land. Both figures were knocked back by a violent energy in a sorry state and landed fiercely on the ground, creating a deep and 100-feet-long ground trail. Meng Lai leapt up from the ground with a vicious look on his face and then spat out a mouthful of blood. Faint waves of pain could be felt on his body. In the previous exchange, his body had taken more than 10 brutal blows from Little Flame. Naturally, Little Flame also received more than 10 blows from him at the same time. However, what pissed Meng Lai off was that Little Martin's body was terrifyingly tough. The degree of the damage done by Meng Lai's attacks on Little Flame's body did not reach the former's expectation. "Since you dare to play with Daddy, Daddy will play with you until you die." The viciousness on Meng Lai's face was getting obvious. Apparently, he was not happy to be forced by Little Flame into this state. Licking his lips with his scarlet tongue, Meng Lai suddenly opened up his feet and bent his body slightly forward. His muscle began to vibrate with a weird arc. At the same time, impetuous waves of energy extended outward from his feet. At this moment, the huge piece of land surrounding him began to tremble violently. The trembling of the ground became increasingly violent. Eventually, cracks and crevices started to form and extend around Meng Lai's body. At that moment, it looked as if an earthquake was occurring. Great seismic wave. Meng Lai took a step forward and a callous roar came out of his throat. Following which, he bent over his body and landed a ferocious punch on the ground ahead of him. Bang! The piece of land where he landed his punch began to rupture and an enormous crevice formed under his fist and tore through the ground with a lightning speed, causing numerous gigantic and tall trees to collapse on the way. The speed of the crevice extension was extremely fast. In a blink of an eye, the crevice reached within 10 meters of Little Flame. Then, the countless crushed stones in the crevice began to give off a dreadful energy wave. At this moment, the crushed stones materialized into a huge python that lunged towards Little Flame's chest with an astonishing speed. Bang! A deep and low sound resounded through the air and Little Flame's muscular body shot backward, snapping hundreds of gigantic trees on his way and whipping up sand and stones into the air. Heh? Upon seeing this, a sinister smirk appeared on Meng Lai's callous face. However, just as the smirk appeared on his face, his eye pupils began to dilate. All he could see was a black figure surged outward from where Little Flame had landed. This sight would cause one to tremble with fear. Humph, a cockroach that can't be killed. After Meng Lai saw Little Flame was not severely injured by his powerful attack, the former's facial expression turned grim. Following which, he bent over his body and bombarded the ground with fist again. Another crevice erupted and extended through the ground like a thick black line, which surged towards the incoming figure. Bang! As the ground split open, a huge, crushed rocks-made python that was engulfed by horrifying energy lunged at Little Flame. However, this time around, as the huge python lunged out, the black figure swiped out an enormous black tiger paw. The tiger paw was emitting a kind of dreadful aura and it eventually smacked the huge python with one swipe. Boom! A formidable force erupted from the tiger paw and the crushed rocks-made python exploded immediately. What? Upon seeing this scene, Meng Lai's facial expression changed drastically. And before Meng Lai could do anything, that black figure surged forward and Little Flame appeared in his sight. However, at this point of time, Little Flame's arms had been transformed into two black-colored tiger limbs. The wiggling veins on those tiger limbs looked like young dragons, giving off a frightening savage energy at the same time. This is... Meng Lai's eye pupils shrunk when he saw the two real tiger claws. However, before he could say anything, Little Flame clenched his tiger paws while his eyes were surging with a scarlet glow. Like a legitimate black tiger that was ripping its prey's heart, Little Flame's paw bombarded Meng Lai's chest without any mercy. Clang! A metallic sound rang through the air. Meng Lai's chest actually caved in from that attack. Luckily, he possessed the 4 Nirvana stage's Nirvana golden body, otherwise his heart would have been ripped out by Little Flame's paw. However, even though Meng Lai's Nirvana golden body was able to block Little Flame's abnormally powerful punch, his body still flew backward. Under numerous astonished gazes, he spat out a mouthful of blood. The entire area broke out into an uproar. The battle between Little Flame and Meng Lai was rather gory. Both of their punches landed precisely on each other's body. Everyone knew that if this kind of punch landed on someone else, his or her body would explode into a blood mist. That Lin Yang is quite brutal. When Mu Lin and his counterpart saw Meng Lai, who was well known for his savagery, fell into a disadvantageous position in his death battle against Little Flame, they could not help but suck in a deep breath of cold air. Their facial expressions grew exceptionally solemn. Now, they finally discovered that each individual of the Lindong trio was comparable to a 4 Nirvana stage practitioner. In this way, they are equivalent to 3 4 Nirvana stage practitioners. This kind of lineup and strength was much more powerful than those super empires. This discovery made the smiles on Mu Lin and his counterparts' faces somewhat bitter. Even though they were not considered really outstanding among the super empires, their foundation was still much more stronger as compared to other empires. However, at the end of the day, these 3 practitioners who came from a low-ranked empire still surpassed them. Even if they were sanguine about this disparity, they still held an unbalanced impression of the situation in their hearts. That Luo Tong is so miserable, Mu Hanyu suddenly spoke in a soft voice. Mu Lin laughed bitterly and looked at the distant forest. Sounds of trees collapsing could be heard constantly. He could see that one figure was beaten up like a punching bag. That figure was Luo Tong from the Wind Cloud Empire. He was also a 4 Nirvana stage practitioner, and yet, he completely lost his ability to fight back in the hands of the devilish handsome young man. His opponent is sick in the mind. Mu Lin heaved a sigh. The odds of Wind Cloud Empire winning this battle seemed to be lower and lower. That was because the sudden outburst of powers from Lindong's camp was rather frightening. Fong Kang is also being pinned down by Lindong. 2 of them raised their heads and looked at the distant sky. The battle over there was extremely intense. However, even though Fong Kang had displayed his soul martial art, he still did not show any sign of stopping Lindong. When their soul martial arts collided, it even seemed that Lindong had the upper hand over Fong Kang. However, Mu Hanyue's beautiful eyes flickered and she spoke with a gentle voice. Fong Kang still has his trump card. Mu Lin's facial expression slightly changed and nodded his head. Until now, Fong Kang had not used the heavenly soul treasure that he had obtained during the auction. If the heavenly soul treasure's power was unleashed, Lindong might not be able to withstand it. Bang! In the sky, the ancient huge fingers once again detonated the 4 tornado palms that were incoming from various crafty angles. Violent shock waves sent Lindong and Fong Kang flying off for more than a few hundred meters. Following which, they stabilized their bodies in the sky with a hastened breathing. At this moment, both of their faces were pale white. It appeared that even with their strength, they could not handle the heavy exhaustion from the previous exchange of blows. Fong Kang wiped off the bloodstain on the corners of his mouth. With a sinister look on his face, he gazed in the direction of Meng Lai. The corners of his eyes twitched and spoke with a hoarse voice. I didn't expect all of you to conceal your capabilities to such extent. It doesn't feel good to kick an iron plate, right? Lindong sneered while stretching his numb hands. It's indeed slightly troublesome, but it's an overestimation to call yourself an iron plate. Fong Kang's mouth curled and traces of chilliness seeped out from his eyes. Soon after, he reached his palm and slowly said, initially I still thought I would not need to use it. However, I could no longer stand the fact that you're still alive. Therefore, no matter how troublesome you are, I must take your life today. Ruthlessness flashed upon Fong Kang's face abruptly. Immediately, he clenched his fist and a heaven-covering black glow gushed out from it. Under numerous astonished gazes, a black-colored metal seal appeared. Fong Kang finally could not help but unleash his trump card, the Heavenly Soul Treasure. This video will end here.